She said the wrong thing, in the wrong room, to the wrong men, and somehow, it saved everyone's lives. Vera Cole had been a professional interpreter for 9 years, fluent in 6 languages, certified by the State Department, trusted by embassies, corporations, and 3 federal agencies who paid well and asked no questions. She had sat in rooms where the wrong word could start a war. She had always said the right one. Until the afternoon of October 14th, in a private conference room on the 14th floor of a Washington, D.C. hotel, when her exhausted brain pulled the wrong phrase from the wrong corner of her memory, and the most dangerous peace negotiation in the city's underground history cracked open like a fault line and somehow, impossibly, held. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Stay with me, because the mistake is only the beginning of this story. The reason she made it, that is where everything lives. Vera had not slept in 31 hours. That was the first problem. The second problem was that she had not been told, when she accepted this assignment through a private firm 2 days earlier, that the meeting she was interpreting for was not a corporate acquisition negotiation. She had been told it was a trade dispute between 2 European business delegations. She had prepared accordingly. She had reviewed her Sicilian Italian and her Calabrian dialect until both were sharp and clean in her mind, the way she always prepared, thorough, precise, invisible. The interpreter was never supposed to be the most important person in the room. She was supposed to be furniture that spoke. She understood immediately upon entering that this was not a trade dispute. The men on both sides of the long mahogany table did not look like businessmen. They looked like men who had survived things that businessmen did not survive. The air in the room was the specific quality of air that exists when 2 groups of people are sitting very still because moving too quickly might mean dying. There were 12 men total, 6 on each side, and at the head of the table, standing rather than sitting, was a man she had not been briefed on. He was tall, dark-featured, olive complexion deepened by what looked like years of outdoor cold rather than sun, a jaw that had never learned to soften, and eyes that moved across the room the way a chess player's eyes move across a board, not looking at pieces, looking at consequences. He wore a dark gray suit with no tie. His right hand rested on the back of the chair at the table's head, and his knuckles, she noticed, carried the particular stillness of hands that were used to holding things and had chosen, for this moment, to hold nothing. His name, she would learn in the next 4 minutes, was Caruso. Just the one name. The way it was spoken by the other men in the room told her everything the briefing had not. He looked at her when she entered, not the way men usually looked at her. She was used to that particular taxonomy of glances and had long ago learned to move through them without breaking stride. He looked at her the way she looked at a document she hadn't translated before, assessing, measuring the distance between what was on the surface and what was underneath. She met his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she took her seat at the corner of the table, opened her notepad, and told herself the same thing she always told herself in rooms like this one. Rooms she had not known would be like this until she was already inside them. Do the job. Say the right words. Be furniture. She said the wrong word 11 minutes later. And if you think this is a story about a mistake, stay right there. Because what Vera said in that room, and why she said it, and what it cost her to carry it afterward, that is not a mistake. That is the most deliberate thing she never meant to do. Don't go anywhere. This story is only just starting. The room stopped breathing. That was the only way to describe it. One moment the air in that 14th floor conference room was tight, with the specific pressure of 2 hostile groups performing civility at each other across a mahogany table. And then Vera spoke, and the pressure changed. Not louder, not more violent. It shifted sideways into something no one in the room had prepared for. Silence of a completely different kind. The kind that follows truth rather than threat. Here's what happened. The delegate on the eastern side of the table, a sharp-faced man named Enzo who had been speaking in a Calabrian dialect so thick it curled at the edges like old paper, had said, in the clipped formal phrasing of someone reciting a prepared statement, that his organization would never accept terms built on the foundation of what had been done to his brother in 2019. It was a line designed to close a door, a territorial declaration dressed as a grievance. Vera had interpreted it correctly 7 words in, and then her exhausted brain, running on no sleep and the particular cruel clarity of the overtired, pulled the wrong synonym from deep memory, not the word for never, but the word for not yet. Not the phrase that closed a door, the phrase that left one open. She heard herself say it, a fraction of a second too late to pull it back. Her pen stopped moving on her notepad. Her eyes stayed forward. She did not correct herself. In 9 years of interpreting, she had never not corrected herself. She could feel the heat of the error sitting in the room's air like something physical. But what she could also feel, in the 3 seconds of charged silence that followed, was that something had shifted on the far side of the table. She did not look at Caruso. She looked at her notepad. Her handwriting was perfectly steady. Her hands were not. Caruso spoke. His Italian was quiet and without inflection, the way very controlled people speak when they are processing something unexpected. He said 2 sentences. Vera translated them accurately, every word, no deviation. What he had said, in response to the door that Vera's mistranslation had accidentally left open, was, "Then we are talking about a timeline rather than a wall. And perhaps that is a conversation worth having." The man named Enzo did not respond for 11 seconds. Vera counted them. Then he set both hands flat on the table, a gesture she later learned was significant, and said, in the same clipped dialect, that perhaps it was. The meeting did not end the war that afternoon. Wars, even the underground kind, the ones fought in private rooms and unmarked vehicles, and through intermediaries who never use their real names, do not end in single afternoons. But something shifted in that room that had not shifted in 4 years of negotiation. A door that had been sealed opened by one syllable. And the only person in that room who knew it was an accident was Vera. And Caruso, who had been watching her from the moment she sat down, and who had seen the half-second pause before she completed the translation, and who did not say a word about it then or after, but whose eyes found hers when the meeting concluded and the other men were pushing back their chairs and reaching for their phones. He did not speak to her directly. He did not need to. The look lasted 2 seconds at most. It said, very clearly and without any language at all, "I saw what you did." And then he turned and walked out of the room with his men around him like a current around a stone. Vera sat at the corner of the table after everyone had gone and looked at her notepad. The wrong word was there in her own handwriting, circled without her realizing she had circled it. She closed the notepad. She collected her bag. She told herself on the elevator down that it was over. A single mistranslation in a room full of dangerous men who were already gone. She told herself she would not think about it again. She was wrong about that. Within 48 hours, she would be thinking about almost nothing else. Not frantic, not aggressive. 3 measured knocks on the door of her apartment in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., at 7:42 in the evening. The kind of knock that belongs to someone who has decided to be there and is not apologizing for it. Vera was at her kitchen table with a bowl of soup she had been meaning to eat for 40 minutes and a translation document for a State Department briefing due the next morning. She was wearing a dark green oversized sweater, her natural hair pinned up loosely, reading glasses on. She was not expecting anyone. She looked at the door for a moment before she moved. Then she crossed the apartment and looked through the peephole and felt every thought she had carefully arranged over the past 3 days scatter like paper and wind. Caruso stood in her hallway alone. No men, no security, just him in a charcoal coat over a dark sweater, hands loose at his sides, looking directly at the peephole as if he knew exactly where to look. Her hand stayed on the door without opening it for 5 full seconds. Then she opened it. Not because she wasn't afraid. Because she had spent 3 days telling herself there was nothing to be afraid of, and she needed to find out if that was true. He looked at her with the same assessing directness he had used in the conference room. He said, without preamble, without pretense, "May I come in?" Vera stepped back from the door. She had no idea why. She would spend a long time afterward trying to explain it to herself. He sat in the chair across from her kitchen table without being invited to sit there. He looked at the soup and the open document, and the reading glasses she had forgotten were still on her face. She took them off. He looked at her directly. "I came to ask you something," he said. "One question." Vera crossed her arms and leaned against the counter. She had decided on the way from the door to the kitchen that she would not be the version of herself that became smaller in rooms with men like him. "Ask it," she said. He did not smile, but something in his face acknowledged what she'd done. "Why didn't you correct it?" he asked. "The translation. You knew within the first second." Vera looked at him. The silence between the question and her answer was not empty. It was full of the 3 days she had spent sitting with that very question herself. Because the correct translation was wrong, she said finally. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very carefully, "Explain that." She sat down across from him because her legs had decided they were done standing. "The accurate translation closes a door that has been closed for 4 years, she said. The inaccurate translation was the only version of that sentence that was actually true. He looked at her for a long time. Not with threat, not with calculation. With something closer to the expression of a man who has been handed an answer he had not known he was looking for. "That is a very dangerous way to do your job," he said. "I know," Vera said. He said nothing for a long time after that. She refilled his coffee without asking if he wanted it. He didn't thank her. He drank it. And that was the beginning of something neither of them had a name for yet. But it was already too late to call it nothing. No knock this time. A message through the same private firm that had booked her original assignment. Concise, professional, no explanation. "Your services are required for a follow-up session." Same location. Thursday at noon. Vera stared at the message for longer than it deserved. She typed back one word. Confirmed. She did not examine why she confirmed it in under 3 seconds. She told herself it was professional. She was a freelance interpreter. This was a client. The fact that the client had sat in her kitchen and drunk her coffee and looked at her like she was the most interesting problem he had encountered in years was irrelevant. She was very good at telling herself things. She was less good, that week, at believing them. The follow-up session was different. The room was the same. The mahogany table, the 14th floor, the Washington, D.C. skyline flat, and gray through the tall windows. But this time there were fewer men. 4 on Enzo's side instead of 6. 3 on Caruso's side instead of 6. And the temperature of the room was different, still tense, still careful. But the specific pressure of that first meeting had changed. There was something in it now that hadn't been there before. Space. The door Vera had accidentally left open had not closed in the days between. Someone had quietly been walking through it. She took her seat at the corner of the table and opened her notepad and reminded herself she was furniture. She translated everything correctly this time. Every word, every inflection, every pause that carried meaning. She was precise and invisible and professional, and she did not make a single error across 3 hours of careful negotiation. And somewhere in the second hour she became aware, without looking directly at him, that Caruso was watching her. Not the way he watched the other men, assessing, strategic. Differently. The way you watch something you are trying to understand before it moves. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on her notepad and the speaker and the steady work of converting one language into another. But she felt his attention the way you feel weather changing before it arrives. The session ended at 3 in the afternoon. The men filed out. Vera collected her things with the practiced efficiency of 9 years of doing exactly this. She was pulling her bag strap over her shoulder when he said her name. Not Miss Cole. Not the interpreter. Vera. She turned. The room was empty except for them. He was standing at the window with his back to the city, hands in his coat pockets, looking at her. I need to tell you something, he said. She waited. He did not speak immediately. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she had not seen on him before, not calculating, not assessing. Closer to the expression of a man who has rehearsed what he's about to say and has just decided to abandon the rehearsal. What you did in the first session, he said. The thing you told me was because the accurate translation was wrong. He paused. I have been in rooms where the right words destroyed everything and the wrong words built something. I have been in those rooms for 20 years. He paused again. I have never had someone explain it to me in one sentence before. Vera looked at him. She did not fill the silence. He was not finished. I wanted you to know, he said, that what you did mattered. Not just for the negotiation. He stopped there. She understood that he had not stopped because he ran out of words. He stopped because the next words were ones he had not yet decided to say out loud. That was fine. She understood things that were not said out loud. It was most of her job. She nodded once, picked up her bag, and walked out. In the elevator down, she stood very still and stared at the doors and thought about the way he had said her name. Like he had been holding it for a while before using it. Vera was in her Georgetown apartment, already in bed with a book she wasn't reading, when her personal phone buzzed with a number she recognized now. She answered before the second ring without deciding to. His voice was different from the conference room. Tighter. Not panicked. Caruso did not do panic, but compressed in the way that very controlled people sound when something has forced them to move faster than they planned. I need you, he said. Tonight. The negotiation is falling apart. Enzo's men are claiming the terms from last week were misrepresented. They're saying the language was deliberately skewed in our favor. They're threatening to walk away and take everything with them. He paused. I need someone in that room tonight who they will believe is neutral, who they know is accurate. Vera sat up in the dark of her bedroom. Where? She said. He gave her the address. A private residence in Georgetown, 6 blocks from her apartment. She looked at the ceiling for 3 seconds. Then she got up and got dressed. She arrived at 11:41 p.m. to a brownstone that looked like a professor's house from the outside and looked like nothing she could easily categorize from the inside. There were 8 men in a wood-paneled sitting room, coats still on, the energy of people who had arrived expecting confrontation. Enzo was there, standing rather than sitting, arms crossed, jaw set. Caruso stood at the far side of the room. He looked at her when she came through the door with an expression she read as relief, though it was so brief and so well-controlled that she was not certain afterward if she had read it correctly or invented it. She took a position in the center of the room and asked, in the voice she used when rooms needed settling, for everyone to sit down. They sat. She did not ask them to do it twice. For the next 90 minutes Vera interpreted with the precision of a surgeon. Every word in both directions, clean and faithful and unambiguous. When Enzo's delegate accused Caruso's team of manipulating the previous session's language, Vera asked both sides to provide the specific phrases in question and then translated both versions for both rooms simultaneously, clearly, with no advocacy in any direction. She was not furniture tonight. She was the room's spine. At 1:14 in the morning, Enzo uncrossed his arms and put both hands on the table, the same gesture she had seen in the first meeting. He said 3 sentences in Calabrian dialect. Vera translated them without pause. He says the terms as originally stated are acceptable. He says the misunderstanding was his side's error in interpretation, not yours. He says he is prepared to sign by the end of the week. The room did not erupt. It exhaled, slowly, carefully, like a breath held for 4 years. After the men left, Vera sat in the quiet sitting room alone for a moment. The fire in the grate had burned low. She was tired down to the architecture of herself, the specific exhaustion of someone who has held enormous weight with perfect form and is only now, in private, feeling the cost of it. She heard him come back into the room. She didn't turn around. She heard him cross to the chair across from her and sit. She felt him looking at her the way she had felt it in the conference room, with the specific quality of attention he gave to things he was trying to fully understand. She turned to face him. His tie was gone now, top button of his shirt open, the controlled architecture of his daytime presence slightly loosened by the hour and the weight of what had just happened. He looked at her across the low firelight. "Thank you," he said. It was not a formal thank you. It was the kind that cost something. She looked at him. She had been careful for 9 years. Careful in rooms, careful with words, careful with the distance she kept between herself and the things she interpreted, because the interpreter was never the story. But something in that firelit room, in the particular quiet that follows a war that has been walked back from the edge, made careful feel like the wrong word. She let him hold her gaze without retreating from it. "You didn't need to come," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Yes, I did," she said simply. And both of them understood that they were no longer talking about the negotiation. 3 weeks passed. The agreement was signed on a Friday in a Washington, D.C. attorney's office with 6 witnesses and no ceremony. The war that had run quietly underground for 4 years was over. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the particular exhausted relief of 2 sides that had finally run out of reasons to keep fighting. Vera was not in the room for the signing. She had not been invited and had not expected to be. She was in her Georgetown apartment at her kitchen table, working on a State Department document, when she got a message from the private firm. Assignment concluded. "Thank you for your services." She set her phone down. She made herself tea. She went back to work. She told herself it was finished. She had done her job. She had done it better than she had perhaps ever done it. Not because of the accidental mistranslation, but because of everything that came after. She had walked into rooms at 11 p.m. and held them together with her bare hands and her voice and her complete refusal to let language become a weapon when it could be a bridge. She had done what she was trained to do, and she had done it well, and now it was done. That was the clean version of the story. The problem was that the clean version kept running up against the memory of a wood-paneled sitting room and a low fire and a man looking at her across the quiet, like she was the only clear thing in a very complicated world. He knocked on her door on a Saturday morning 11 days after the signing. She opened it before she had finished deciding to. He was in a dark coat and gray sweater, no formality, hands in his pockets, the particular look of a man who has decided something and has come to say it before he changes his mind. She stepped back from the door. He came in. She did not offer coffee. They both stood in the middle of her apartment in the morning light, which was honest and direct and allowed no hiding. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I have been trying to find the correct words for 11 days. She almost smiled. "How did that go?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "Badly," he said. She waited. He took a breath. Not dramatic, just the breath of a man setting something down he has been carrying. "You translated something incorrectly in a room full of dangerous people," he said, "and you did it because you understood the room better than anyone in it, including me. And then you came back and stood in the middle of a crisis at midnight and held it together with nothing but your voice and your judgment." He paused. "I have spent my entire life in rooms where people do things for angles, for leverage, for what they can take." He looked at her directly. "I cannot find an angle in anything you have done." Vera looked at him for a long time. "There isn't one," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "That is the part one keep coming back to." The morning light lay across her kitchen floor in long, warm rectangles. She could hear the Georgetown street below, ordinary Saturday sounds, a world going about its business outside this apartment where something was being said that neither of them had planned to say. He reached into his coat pocket and set something on her kitchen counter, a small folded note. She looked at it without picking it up. He said, "That is the address of a restaurant on Connecticut Avenue. Tonight at 7, if you want. No meeting. No interpretation. No room full of dangerous men. He paused, and something moved in his expression that she recognized now as the version of him that existed before all the control. Just dinner. She looked at the note. Then she looked at him. Just dinner, she repeated. Just dinner, he said, though his eyes said something more patient and more permanent than that. She picked up the note. She unfolded it. She read the address. She folded it again and held it in her hand and looked at him with the same directness she had used in every room she had ever walked into. 7, she said. He nodded once. He turned to go. He was at the door when she said his name. Just Caruso, the way everyone said it, the only name there was. He stopped. She said, "You spent 11 days finding the wrong words." He turned back slightly. She let the smallest smile happen. "You found the right ones." He looked at her for a moment. Then for the first time in every room she had ever seen him in, Caruso smiled. Not controlled. Not strategic. Just real. He left. She stood in her kitchen holding a folded address in both hands and felt the particular feeling of something beginning that was going to require everything she had and was going to be absolutely worth it. Some bridges are built by architects. Some are built by accident. And some are built by a woman with 6 languages and a tired brain who said the wrong word in the right room at the exact right moment and changed everything. If you stayed until the end, you already know, the most important things we ever say are sometimes the ones we never meant to. Subscribe for a new story every week. And share this with someone who has ever said exactly the wrong thing and somehow made it right.